Hello everyone, this is Bradley. Today's topic is going to discuss instancing objects in animation nodes. This can be a more tricky and broad topic than what you think. So I think very likely this will be a huge series that I will do very slowly, part by part as the time goes. Particularly for today, I will try to talk about the basic ways of instancing. Also be aware that I'm going to build a preset within this tutorial, so there may be a breakdown provided for future reference in the description or pinned comment. So let's go. So here is a very basic setup that I have probably shown to you for a billion times in other tutorials. So I'm using a distributed matrices node to generate a grid with 9 locations because it's 3 times 3. And I'm going to instance this object for 9 times and place each of its child on each location of this grid. And that's why I have one mother cube and 9 child cubes. And in such a case, the original cube is seen from the viewport and the render. If you don't want to see that in the viewport and the render, one method is to just toggle this screen icon off. Then it will it will disable in the viewport and the render. I personally do not like this method. And if you have seen my tutorial, I barely use this method. The reason is that if you ever regret about what you have done, for example, maybe you think, oh, I would like to add a subdivision modifier, then you will see you cannot do this thing at all. And if you go to the physics tab, you cannot do this thing as well. If you go to the constraint tab, you still cannot do this thing at all. You can only add a material. So, and imagine if you're having a very huge tree, very huge node tree, which frequently occurs in animation nodes. Then you have to go back to this object instance node and toggle this back and reselect this object and select the modifier or whatever things. It means you have to search an object instance node in a huge node tree may not be something desired. There is an easy way. For example, you can hit Ctrl F and search the node, but doing so is still something is not preferred by me. Personally speaking, what I usually do is just hide this in viewport by hitting this eye icon, so that I can still select that while not seeing that in the viewport, but I am able to add modifier or whatever other kind of things. After finishing everything, and I know I will not edit this cube anymore, I can just disable this collection so that I don't see that in the viewport and the render or other things. And because this is in the outline, which is much clearer compared to the node tree, so I just reopen this collection and I can just edit it right away. This is personally how I do. You don't necessarily follow my instruction or my advice, but this is what I do. Anyway, another thing I would like to say is that if by any chances, if you add a subdivision surfaces, you can see our mother cube has been changed due to the modifier into a sphere. Its children have not been affected with this change at all. This is because they don't have a modifier as the mother. If you want its children to inherit the modifier, then you have to click this copy for object. And basically this copy for object will copy the name, copy the modifier, copy the physics, copy the constraint. I'm afraid it will also copy the particle system as well, and copy the material. So basically many things that you can potentially think, and also copy this many values as well. However, what you will see is if I change the value of this cube, change the viewport to 3, this cube has a quite amount of subdivision surfaces, but its children has not been updated. If you want to re-update or update all the information, then you have to retake everything again. This is the point. Or you just deselect or select, who cares what you actually do. One thing I have to remind you is if you're instancing this object for billion times, sometimes this action, like the updating things again, will freeze your Blender for maybe several seconds. now the execution of node tree only takes about milliseconds, so it's about 1,000th of what can potentially happen, or even less. So sometimes you just need to be aware of this kind of issue. Another option is deep copy. Deep copy is actually a very interesting thing. So now if I goes to edit mode of this mother and I change this, I edit this cube, and if I right after I exit the edit mode, you can see all its children have updated their mesh at the real times. It's because if you go to the mesh tab, then you can see all their mesh are essentially linked by Blender. They're not independent to each other. This also can be seen. So if I go to the edit mode of children and I try to edit that, and after I exit the edit mode, you can see the mesh of the child has been updated back to the mother object in this case. And this is how linkage work. But sometimes maybe you don't want this linkage. So you want a mesh to be independent from each other. And in such a case, you just need to hit this deep copy. And in such a case, then no matter how you actually edit them, it will not be updated to other cases. So this is the function of deep copy. Also, a thing I would like to remind you is that it's not only copy the mesh, but the many other information within the mesh tab as well. So for example, the UV map will be independent, and more importantly, the vertex color will be independent as well. So if you don't have this deep copy and you try to use the preset that I've built, for example, random color, then it will basically just not show the random color. They will have the same color, because this node is based on the vertex color, and the vertex color is a part of mesh. So if your mesh is linked, then their vertex color are linked. So you just don't get random color within the vertex color, and so on and so forth. You can try by yourself, but this is kind of idea. What I like to say is usually I just copy these four objects and deep copy regardlessly, because these are so important options in general. And final thing I would like to discuss with this object instance in this case is if you disable this copy from sources, then you get other options and you do not see any of its child at all. The reason is because you don't have mesh information. Actually, yeah, basically the idea is that you are generating object, but you don't have a mesh within this object. So you don't even have a single vertex of this object. So in such a case, if you would like to generate any particular things, then you have to use other methods to get a mesh into this object. But that's kind of another topic. By default, you always have this copy from sources on. And I usually think just regardlessly, I just use this copy from sources, and this part is being done. A bad part, a con of this object instance node is that sometimes it's kind of very stressful for the machine to duplicate a lot of objects. So what it means is this object instance, technically speaking, it does not have an upper limit about how many objects it can instance, but from a efficiency point of view, it actually causes a lot of stress to your machine. So sometimes maybe you don't wish to use this method, and that's why there is another method of instancing in animation nodes that I will discuss. So here is another way to instance objects. I still generate a grid of 9 locations using this distributed matrices node, but instead of using object instance node, I'm using a transform mesh node and output a single object which is called a target. So I have this single target but it contains 9 cubes. This actually relies on a feature in Blender that you can have disconnected meshes within a single object. So for example, if I add a cube and I go to edit mode, I can add a ico sphere, I can add a UV sphere, I can add a cone to these entire meshes. It's also possible, it's also possible just hitting P to separate by loose parts, or you just select these multiple objects and hit Ctrl J to join the object into the single one. All this kind of feature does not really exist in Cinema 4D, or actually Cinema 4D has a different logic to deal with kind of actions. But what I'd like to say is now you generate a single object with different meshes, which means the UV map and the vertex color and the material will all be shared, and even the modifier will essentially be shared. Sometimes this may be something that you would like, something desired or not desired, I don't know. But using this way can be potentially helpful in some circumstances. For example, if I have a plane and I need a Boolean I would like to Boolean this entire whole thing, then I can directly just do that. But if you imagine if you're using the object instancer, then you are generating multiple objects, then you have to find a way to combine all the meshes together and then apply the Boolean and so on and so forth. So this is one advantage of this method to instance the object. There is also another one very important advantage of using this method is that this method can directly goes into a super high count of duplication without much lag. So you can see the execution of node tree is only about 2 milliseconds. And it does not actually cause a lot of problems. So you can still go to 4. So now you have lots, billions of cubes. But you can try this method with object instancer. It will actually explode your computer. Even if object instancer method, technically speaking, does not have a limitation of instances, but it just causes a lot of calculation. Maybe the reason is for generating multiple objects, it needs to copy a lot of modifier, it causes a lot of settings, it copies a lot of meshes or whatever. Who knows? But at least using this method is super efficient. And one more advantage of using this method is that all these nodes can be put into subprogram. But if you have an object instancer, it cannot go into any subprogram. For example, the group inputs. So you put the object into inputs, and it will immediately generate the red lines in this animation node viewports. It's because this actually is a sign of errors. And if you hit the T panels, it will say object instancer must not be in a subprogram. So this issue also applies to the loop input as well. Which means you can actually not do any preset with this node. However, using this method, you can generate presets. So in which I generated a instancing object. So basically, this is a node. And if I put matrices into transformation and mesh into meshes, and let's select this cube. So we're using 3 nodes instead of 4 nodes to accomplish such a task of duplicating objects, although it's a combined object. And to generate such kind of preset is pretty easy. You just get a group input, and you get an object mesh data and transform mesh. One thing I have to remind you is you only see 3 sockets in this mesh object input node. But in reality, if you hit U, goes to socket settings, you can see there's a hidden options. Another ways to get all these options is that you can hit N and you will have basically the same panels. And I'm going to put a load UV and load vertex color to the location because sometimes they will be useful as well. If you are frequently working with multiple scenes in Blender file, then you probably would like to select this using scene as well. Personally speaking, I don't usually worry about this, so I just don't put these sockets. I put a mesh into meshes, and the transformation is something which is very tricky because the point we make this preset is to duplicate the object. And once we would like to duplicate the object, it means we must input multiple transformation. So in this case, instead of plug this transformation back into the input, I'm going to hit this plus icon and generate a matrix list. And I'm going to put this matrix list into the transformation to turn the transformation into transformations. And I can name that as transformations. And we can name this group input as a instancing object tutorial and get an output node. So I'm going to output the mesh. And basically this preset is done. You can hit W, invoke these subprograms, and put the transformations. And now by selecting this cube, you're instancing this cube into an object which is called the target. Last thing that I would like to mention before I finish is that people once asked me, if you're using this method, can you actually add the multiple materials to the object? And it's actually a very tricky question. But I will give you a hint. There's a node which is called set polygon material index. Because this is a new node, there is no menu for that. But you have to study by yourself. There is a video tutorial and so on and so forth. It requires another long discussion, and I don't want to cover that at this moment. I would only say it's possible, but the circumstances to use that and the way to use that might require a lot more detailed discussion. However, if you just want to get a random color, then it's possible. So in such kind of circumstances, while you literally have a target, a single object with different meshes, a group of disconnected meshes, if you would like to have random color, then you can go to shaders and get a color ramp and get a geometry, and there is a random per island. I think this option is available since 2.82, and you put that into factors of the color ramp, and then you go to the render view, and you can see actually it does not actually work. If you put the color into emission, it's just not working. They have the same color. This is because, so if you need a cycle to make it work. So if you change it to cycles, then you see the random emission color. So some are black, some are gray, some are whatever stuff. And for a single mesh, they basically have the same color. But it only works in cycle. So what if I really would like to use eevee to do these entire whole things? Then you probably need to use another method. So in this case, let's not use the object, but use a triangulate. There's a unity triangle mesh. So what it does is it generates a triangle faces, and we can put the cubes parent with our target. So now I can see the cube is a child of our target. And here what we can do is to use the instancing, so you can use either vertices or faces. In this particular case, I would say usually the faces is the way you want. So now we re-get the objects again. So why do we actually use a workaround to use this method? Is because by doing so, you can use the, instead of using the random per island, you can go to the objects info and use random socket. And it does not work with the target because you need to use the cube. So you need to apply the material to the mother object. So you can try by yourself so that you familiarize with what's actually happening. So by using this method, you can get the random color of each mesh in eevee. And to make this operation available, in addition to what we had done earlier, you can add a boolean, which is basically function as a switch. So let's name as use triangulate. And we can add a switch. So you put use triangulate into the condition, and triangulate mesh in the true, object mesh in the false, and put the mesh into mesh. And now if we look at our subprogram, now we have a use triangulate option. And this finally turns to be the idea. So you can definitely try this by yourself. Also, one thing I would like to remind you is by default, its boolean option will be ticked on. If this is not what you want, then you just hit M, goes to advanced node setting and tick that off. So by default, this new node will not tick on this use triangulate option. Actually use a triangle. Yeah, something like that. The naming actually does not really matter. And you can change the order by goes to nodes, make the use triangle options earlier, and so on and so forth. So by doing so, you generate a preset which can be quite useful in many different circumstances, and so on and so forth. So I think basically it's it. So I probably, yeah, I think this is it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll probably see you next time. Bye bye.